Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
Several issues that have been building in Congress around foreign policy, intelligence authorities, affordability, and federal funding are now in windows where action is possible. The timing is different for each, but the possibilities are clear. And here to point out the progress and the obstacles is Deputy News Director for Bloomberg Government, Loren Duggan. Loren, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Never a slow week in Congress. And last week, of course, the president was in Europe for the G7. And we had the signing of the Iran MOU. The Senate is making noise about wanting to confirm or validate that. What are you hearing, and what exactly is their role when it comes to international MOUs?
Well, I think it's two steps, right? First is oversight, which they clearly have and clearly want to do. They want administration officials to come up to Capitol Hill and tell them what's in the deal, what it means, maybe what it doesn't say, and it needs to, because some of these things are secret and behind the lines, right? But then the legislation that was put in place many years ago around the Obama Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action nuclear deal is still on the books. So we'll see if there's more agreement, and this is meant to be an interim agreement while they have more talks about the nuclear program. That could be subject to a vote certainly in the future, depending on what way they go and how Congress responds. But what we've seen so far are a lot of questions about what elements of the MOU mean, what it means for the future talks, and those will continue once lawmakers get back into town. And
those questions have really been bipartisan. What does that imply in terms of the president's support here?
They are bipartisan. Some key Republicans had some big questions. Roger Wicker, who's the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, was one of the people who had some pretty tough questions about it, what it meant and what some of the line items in that MOU meant and what it meant for the longer deal. So there is some skepticism. There will be questions about lifting sanctions on Iran. There's not a lot of trust for Iran in Congress. That is bipartisan and decades-long concern about what goes on in that country and its nuclear program. So, there are tests here potentially for the administration going forward. And some of those could turn into legislation that they want to move. The NDAA might be a prime target to debate these questions, and we're going to see action on that soon. So there's definitely opportunities here for Congress to weigh in, short of even weighing in on the deal itself.
Right. Not only the NDAA, but Reconciliation 3.0, where there might be a defense supplemental for this war. I mean, so really, as you see more Republicans raising questions, does that make the potential for progress of these other sorts of defense-related bills and funding more questionable?
Yeah, defense spending is in a kind of tricky spot because the president wants $1.5 trillion for the next fiscal year. He asked for $1.15 trillion the normal way through regular appropriations, $350 billion through reconciliation. So bills are moving in Congress on that $1.15 trillion part. The NDAAs in both chambers start with that figure. We'll see a defense spending bill go through the House Appropriations Committee with that. But the $350 billion has a lot of question marks. The whole reconciliation question is tough because there's not a lot of time. There could be one focused on defense like we just saw for Homeland Security. But if you're moving a third package, lawmakers are going to want to put more in there. And there's not a lot of time. There's a lot of potential inclusions, and it'll take a lot of political will and agreement to get that over the line. So things are very tricky in the defense funding space at the moment. And time is the greatest villain here, I think, for people trying to get a lot done in that space.
The other big tricky spot is Intel. Lots of fireworks on that last week. We thought we had a path through to the FISA bill, and then the president turned that sort of upside down. Walk us through the D&I nomination, withdrawal, the FISA Act, and kind of where we are there.
Yep. So the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act had key spy powers that expired back on June 12th when Congress couldn't agree on a short or long-term extension of those powers. One of the things that was holding that up is the president's appointment of Bill Pulte, whose day job has been head of the Federal Housing Finance Administration, to be the acting director of national intelligence starting on the 19th. One of the things that Congress wanted was who's going to be the full-time replacement. We want to know what the path ahead for this is. And the president nominated Jay Clayton, who's kind of a known figure. He was the head of the SEC in the first Trump term. He's been in charge of the Southern District of New York office for the judiciary, for the Justice Department, which is a major job. And it seemed like that nomination was on the glide path. Maybe a hearing Wednesday, maybe even confirmation by the end of the week. But from Europe, the president said he wanted that hearing canceled because he wanted the replacement for SDNY to get a hearing. So, wow, that's a lot of moving pieces there. But where it left us was no action right now on FISA, no action on Jay Clayton's permanent appointment, and kind of a stalemate while Bill Pulte took over. There's a lot of questions here, again, on a bipartisan basis about Bill Pulte, what he might do at the agency, and we'll be looking at that. But in the moment, FISA doesn't seem to have a path forward until they unstick some of those other things.
Loren Duggan is the Deputy News Director at Bloomberg Government. And Loren, I guess the real-time implication of the loss of those spy powers is we're in the middle of World Cup and other sorts of major international events, and the intel community can't quite see those comms, so they're worried.
They are worried, and we had a piece that used those events as kind of a framing for why that expiration is worrying some folks. But a court order that has allowed collection is still going forward, and it seems like there hasn't been an immediate disruption in that space. But we'll see if that continues to be the longer this goes on. But people don't want to leave those powers expired in the long term, so we'll see if there's some effort to rejoin here. There's some recesses coming up here around July 4th that might put pressure on lawmakers to get things done as well.
There is one bill that's moving forward, and that's the housing affordability bill. The Senate has now approved the 21st Century Road to Housing Act language that's starting to move forward. Sounds like we might actually get a compromise here. What would that mean?
Yeah, that's an old-fashioned bipartisan bicameral compromise where
What?
each side talked. I know, right? I mean, they each talked to each other and they traded versions back and forth. House passed a version, Senate passed a version, House, and now we're back to this compromise. But there are provisions here to direct HUD to take steps to open up housing, and then there's other provisions that each chamber wanted and finally agreed to. So a ban on institutional investing that the Senate really wanted, a temporary ban on the Federal Reserve issuing a central bank digital currency that the House really wanted, and then some other language that moved back and forth, like a package of community banking bills. But this housing legislation will be significant. People will take a victory lap when this gets over the line. It looks like there's a path for it to get through that final Senate vote on Monday and then through the House later in the week. But it will be a pretty significant change in housing policy that people are going to tout.
And it comes just before the 4th of July, so folks will be back in their districts maybe making some headlines around it.
Absolutely. People will want to take that, go to picnics, and talk about the bill that they just passed.
There is another set of legislation that's getting some more attention, and that's around AI. Certainly, the administration's actions around Mythos and Fable 5 last week raised the temperature here a little bit, but there are a number of bills going back and forth. There's the No Fakes Act, the Kids Online Safety Act, the App Store Accountability Act, all kind of floating around trying to find a balance between oversight and innovation and safety. As you watch those all kind of circling up there, where do you see the potential for compromise?
Increasingly, we're seeing these issues come together into one big puzzle. And a lot of this comes down to, should there be a national framework for AI regulation or the state-by-state approach? So lawmakers are discussing that issue. And then they're discussing some of these other tech issues, which include regulation of the social media networks. And what do you do about deepfakes? What do you do about protecting children online? Do you have verification rules? And that's all coming together in one discussion. What we've seen is Marsha Blackburn, a senator from Tennessee, has been talking to the White House, and I think those talks have been including members of the tech space about what can they get working together. Whether that will yield legislation before the end of before they get to the summer break or by the end of the year remains to be seen. We've also seen the big packages come out in both chambers that are major frameworks. The Obernolte-Trahan bill is a bipartisan one in the House that was released a couple of weeks ago to get discussion going. So I don't think there's consensus, but there are a lot of things happening, sometimes in front of the lights, like approving the No Fakes Act in the Judiciary Committee, but increasingly behind the scenes and in rooms where people are having meetings.
So maybe we can keep our fingers crossed that there is some potential for that old-fashioned compromise and conference negotiations. As we move into the summer, though, the bills that are on top of all of our audience's mind are the appropriations bills. Where are you seeing committee work and where are you seeing progress?
The House has done a lot of committee work. In fact, if they keep to their schedule, by the end of the week, their 12th bill will be out of committee, and they can check that work off their to-do list for the summer. Now, getting them through the floor, a little more difficult. They've passed two. They may do two more this week and get those over the line. The Senate is due to start having markups this week. They're planning action on 4 bills. One of the stumbling points there has been they wanted a bipartisan agreement on top line funding in the Senate before they marked up. They scheduled that markup before they had that agreement. So either that could push that agreement along, or they might take a more one-sided approach than the Senate panel likes to do. They really want those bills to come out bipartisan in the Senate because you need 60 votes to get them through. So you might as well start out with that is kind of the work they do. So a lot of stuff is happening. The markers will be laid down. That doesn't mean we'll see an agreement on finalized funding anytime soon. I presume we're headed towards CR discussions in September, a continuing resolution, because shutdowns will be on top of mind here when we come back in September, and there's going to be great interest in averting one of those, I would think, on both sides.
Well, there's few work days left to watch, so we'll keep an eye open and see how they do.
It's going to be a very busy couple of months.
Loren Duggan is Deputy News Director for Bloomberg Government. We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.